Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Paul Harris and I am president of the City Club's Board of Directors. I'm pleased and honored to introduce today's speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Husain Haqqani, Pakistan's ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Haqqani was born in Karachi, Pakistan. As a student, he acquired traditional Islamic learning as well as education in international relations, educational underpinnings that the ambassador has expanded and employed as a journalist, government official, and diplomat. He earned his Bachelor of Arts and Master's degrees from the University of Karachi and later began a career in journalism with work as East Asian correspondent for Arabia, the Islamic World Review, during the years following the Iranian Revolution. During that period, he wrote extensively on Muslims in China and East Asia and on Islamic political movements. Subsequently, as Pakistan and Afghanistan correspondent for the Far Eastern Economic Review, he covered the war in Afghanistan and acquired a deep understanding, among other things, of militant groups. Ambassador Haqqani also has a distinguished career in government, having served as advisor to 3 Pakistani prime ministers. From 1992 to 1993, he served as Pakistan's ambassador to Sri Lanka. Ambassador Haqqani came to the United States in 2002 as a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C., and an adjunct professor at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. He has contributed to numerous publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the International Herald Tribune, Foreign Policy, and the Financial Times. He's been a frequent commentator on Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Islamic political movements on BBC, C-SPAN, CNN, NBC, Fox News, and ABC, among others. Ambassador Haqqani has also written and spoken extensively on U.S. relations with the Muslim world. Among his numerous writings is his book, Pakistan Between Mosque and Military, published in 2005. I am pleased and honored to present on behalf of the City Club of Cleveland, His Excellency Ambassador Husain Haqqani, Pakistan's ambassador to the United States.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that kind introduction. These days, I have been moving around the United States, speaking to people in different cities. And as you can imagine, almost nowhere is anybody interested in hearing anything about Pakistan. So the audience is usually, sparse, and it's good to see so many people in Cleveland interested in Pakistan. Actually, everywhere there's a lot of interest in Pakistan, and everybody wants to know what the future is, partly because of the way Pakistan gets reported on. I keep telling and reminding people that the old definition of news, and as a former journalist I can get away with criticizing current journalists, which many of you can't, and I always say that the old definition of news, that it's not news when dog bites man, it's only news when man bites dog. Well, what's happening nowadays with 24/7 news cycles and these cable news channels, the fact that some man bit a dog several days ago keeps getting repeated so often that everybody thinks that all that happens in the world is that man bites dog. And in case of Pakistan, you don't hear that on a normal day, in a regular day, 179,998,277 Pakistanis had a normal day. You only hear about the 24 that were killed in a terrorist strike, the 33 that were picked up for plotting terrorism, and the 2 that have been suspected of terrorism. And of course, by the time they have been cleared of that suspicion, you've already seen their picture enough times to mentally form the image that they probably were or weren't. Reminds me of Terence Rattigan's famous play, The Winslow Boy. I don't know how many people in this audience have heard of it or read it. And in that play, basically what happens is that there's this father who sets about, his son goes to Naval Academy, and there he's accused of forging somebody else's signature to cash what was in those days a 5 shilling money order. And the father decides to sue the Naval Academy because he says, my son didn't do it. And of course, the case just drags on. And at one point, the family is sitting around and they're having a discussion. And one of the family members, who's against going through all this judicial process, says, "What are you trying to achieve, Dad?" And father says, "I want to clear the name of my son. I don't want everybody around the world to go around saying that Winslow boy, he's the one who forged that that money order." And one of the members of the family turns around and says, "You really think that's what's going to happen? Most of the people will still, even after the court has cleared him, they will still think and remember, because people don't remember the details." So I am here, ladies and gentlemen, to try and give you some detail that you don't hear on the 24/7 news cycle about Pakistan. Pakistan and the United States. And by the way, somebody did give me a text that I'm supposed to speak from, but I don't have my reading glasses. So you'll all have to live by whatever I carry in my brain rather than what my smart, very smart assistants put down on paper for me. I think it might end up being better, more entertaining, and probably more useful. But then you will be the judges of it at the end of it. Pakistan and the United States have been allies from the earliest days of Pakistan's independence. Pakistan received its independence in 1947. The United States at that time was very keen to contain communism. Pakistan was strategically located. The United States and Pakistan became allies. Pakistan's reason for seeking alliance with the United States at that time was we were a young country, we were insecure about our future, we had just been carved out of India, a new idea, a nation that had to explain itself to everyone, why are we a new nation? And therefore we needed American support to maintain our security capability and to build our economic foundations. Since then, we've moved a long way, come a long way. But this has not been a relationship that has been easy. And the reason why it hasn't been easy is because in the American perspective, Pakistan has always been associated with what I sometimes call the issue du jour, America's issue of the time. In the 1950s and in the 1960s, America's principal issue was containment of communism. Pakistan was an important ally in that, and I know that there is nobody here who was around when the City Club was founded in 1912, but I'm quite certain that there are still people in this audience who remember the famous U-2 incident when Francis Gary Parr's reconnaissance plane was shot down over the Soviet Union. Well, that plane did not take off from Cincinnati. It actually took off from Peshawar, Pakistan. So Pakistan was a good ally to the United States, enabling it to contain the menace of communism, to make sure that the Soviets were not able to expand beyond the Yalta arrangements that Franklin D. Roosevelt had reached with them at the end of the Second World War. But Pakistan's own issue was its conflict with India. And the United States, as President Lyndon Johnson would have said, didn't have a dog in that fight. They liked Pakistan, but they didn't want to do anything about India. And that did not sit well with a lot of Pakistanis because they wanted the United States to, for want of a better word, reward Pakistan for their services in the Cold War with putting America's weight behind Pakistan in resolving our outstanding disputes with India. So we had a problem that the United States didn't like that. And so we had a phase of kind of, the kind of phase that a lot of people have before they start shouting at each other. Unhappiness, wondering whether the other was doing what was expected of the relationship. Second phase of engagement came again when the United States under Richard Nixon decided that it was time to reach out to China. And guess which American ally had had the foresight to have good relations with China? Pakistan. Why did we do that? Because China was our neighbor. It was to our north. And again, we had good relations with China with American understanding that, someday you're going to need us to have good relations with China. Yes, there were people in the United States who until 1974 thought they will somehow bring Chiang Kai-shek's armies back to China to bring the Kuomintang into power. Well, that was over. And so when the United States decided to reach out to China, which by the way nowadays, is anybody in this room able to claim that they are not wearing or using anything that's not made in China? So China, Pakistan became a stepping stone for building American relations with China. Henry Kissinger went to China secretly while pretending to be visiting Pakistan. Again, Pakistan felt that we had done well by the United States, but felt let down when in 1971 in the India-Pakistan War, Pakistan was broken into two. What is today Bangladesh used to be part of Pakistan at that time. It was known as East Pakistan, and it became an independent country. We, of course, now have very good relations with Bangladesh, but at that time it was an issue for us. And again, there was a feeling in Pakistan that the United States did not stand by Pakistan. Then came the third phase, the war against the Soviets in Afghanistan. The Soviets marched into Afghanistan, took over a Muslim country. The entire Muslim world was outraged. And people in the United States said, great opportunity for us. We can actually bleed the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And the Soviet Union was bled in Afghanistan. Of course, the method that was chosen to do that was to help, support, arm, and train an ideologically motivated army. They were known as the Mujahideen at that time. What are Taliban today are actually just second generation Mujahideen. And the Mujahideen at that time in the United States were described by President Reagan as the moral equivalent of America's founding fathers. Now you heard in my bio that I covered that war as a journalist, and boy, when the Mujahideen leaders came to the White House, I looked at those 7 characters and I said, I don't see anyone here who's a potential Thomas Jefferson. But this is my view. Now look, I am somebody who sometimes gets abused and criticized. You know, the Muslim world is very polarized these days between those who support the United States and those who are very antagonistic towards the United States. And those who are hostile to the US abuse me a lot. They call me an American an American instrument. They call me, I'm too fond of America. But I don't mince words. I am. In fact, not only am I fond of Americans as a people, I'm very fond of your history. I think that the United States, and I consider myself a very lucky man. Very few people get the opportunity to represent a country that they love in a country that they admire. But the United States has given a lot to humanity in its relatively short history. And it is short history by global standards. When you realize that cities like Lahore and cities like Damascus and cities like Jerusalem have been around for over 1,000 years, then City Club about to celebrate its centennial, you can put it in perspective. You could put it in perspective. But Americans have many great qualities. They are problem solvers. They have invented more things in the last 2 centuries than humanity had invented in the preceding several. America's 2 great gifts to the world is the whole notion of modern capitalism and democracy. And it's a great ideal. The ideal of a nation where life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a national goal. So America is something that the whole world can admire. But there are 2 things that 2 shortcomings that Americans, if I talk about those shortcomings, and if they take a deep breath and recognize them, they will say, the Pakistani ambassador is not wrong in pointing those 2 out. The 2 things are, Americans don't do patience too well. It's a nation of fast food. It's a nation of fast reading, speed reading. It's a nation of fast news, 30-second soundbite. It's a nation of fast turnovers, shortest tenure of legislatures anywhere in the world, 2 years. Every 2 years you the congressman, a new congressman takes 6 months to figure out his way around all those complex buildings in Washington, D.C. that I have to sometimes roam around to try and get votes for issues that are of importance to my country. Guy figures his way out in 6 months, unpacks his stuff, and then he's running for office again. So patience is not one of those great things that I would list in the list of America's major achievements and Americans' great qualities. The second thing that Americans are a little weak on is history. Because when Americans want to be dismissive about someone, they say, Joe, he's history. Instead of saying, Joe, he's historic, Very different attitudes from the rest of us. So because history doesn't matter, and it matters to the others, Americans often ignore issues of history. And one of the important issues of history is that what we are facing today, and Pakistan and America are allies again in this new effort, which is started after 9/11, when Americans felt they have been attacked, and they decided we have to fight back. We have to fight the terrorists and the extremists and eliminate terrorism in all its forms. But the terrorists came from somewhere. And where did they come from? They came from that effort against the Soviet Union. All the guys who had been trained to become mujahideen against the Soviets, and many of them had come from other countries. They came from Arabia, they came from Indonesia, etc. Well, when the Soviets left, the Americans left. Big mistake. Big mistake. It's like what you tell your children. One of my favorite books, all-time favorite books, is a small book called Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And one of the things we learn in kindergarten is if you turn on a light, you turn it off. So if you're going to train thousands or hundreds of thousands of people into killing people and doing it because you believe in God and you want to kill the godless, you also want to turn them down and say, okay, now the godless guys have been defeated, and by the way, we aren't godless. But Americans didn't stay to do that because it would have involved patience. And so they just left. And these guys organized themselves into an international movement, which is what we have today in the form of Al-Qaeda. What does Al-Qaeda literally mean? It means the base. What is it the base of? It's the base of a quote-unquote global Islamic revolution as they see it. Not the Islam that I practice and many other Muslims in this audience do. An Islam that teaches us love, an Islam that teaches us connection with others, an inclusive Islam, an Islam that tells us to respect Moses and Abraham and Jesus as prophets as well, and that actually has been practiced for several centuries without necessarily being an inspiration for people to blow themselves up. So now we have Pakistan's fourth engagement with the United States. Close engagement. Cold War, China, war against the Soviets, and now war against the terrorists. What is common in all of them? Well, two or three things. First, ironically, in each phase of close engagement, Pakistan always had a military dictator in control inside Pakistan. So average Pakistani felt that the United States tends to support our military dictators and has inadvertently or deliberately weakened our democratic process. Second, it meant that Pakistan and the US have a transactional relationship. The US provides us with economic assistance and military assistance, and we help them do something else. Contain communism, fight the Soviets, now fight the terrorists. This is not the basis of a long-term or sustained relationship. So, when Pakistan returned to democracy in 2008, and President Asif Zardari was elected president, and Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani became Prime Minister, and they asked me to leave my teaching job and come and become Pakistan's ambassador to the US. Several US leaders as well, such as Senator Joe Biden, senator at that time, subsequently became vice president. Many of us worked on what we call the building of a strategic partnership between Pakistan and the United States. Often you read in some of the newspapers, Pakistan, duplicitous, not doing the right thing by the US, etc. Well, that is because of the historic patterns. We are going to change those patterns. Pakistan is undergoing 4 major transformations right now. First, the transformation from a country where the military has ruled for more years than the civilians have. We are building a transformed situation in which democracy will last. There is a near consensus in Pakistan now that there is no point in whenever we get upset with our civilian leaders, and by the way, Americans get pretty upset with your civilian leaders, every now and then. I mean, the standing of Congress is often very low in opinion polls. People people sometimes have greater faith in, I guess, Paris Hilton than they do in their elected representative. But at least that's what they show by paying more attention to what she's saying than what the congressional representative of their district is saying. So it's not uncommon. So in Pakistan, in the past, the pattern was whenever we had some suspicions or doubts about our elected leaders, we would immediately say, oh, well, the military can take over and the military will clean the deck. No longer. Most Pakistanis now agree that democracy is the way forward. So that's the first transformation. Pakistan will transform itself into a democracy. How will that help US-Pakistan relations? It will give us a philosophical and ideological underpinning. Pakistan and the US now are not in a transactional relationship. They become allies who share the value of democracy, who understand that democracy is the way forward in the 21st century. The second transformation we are working on is that because of our complex history and our complex relationship in our neighborhood, and because of the fact that we were a staging ground for war against the Soviets, and tens of thousands of our young people and Afghans who were living in our country ended up becoming trained in what they perceived was jihad, and they considered it a religious obligation, we have ended up having a culture of militancy and militarism. And what we want is to replace it with a culture of entrepreneurship. We want Pakistan to be a nation that is taking advantages of its major location. We want to become a productive country with doubling our agricultural production. And the US is helping us do that. In fact, Congress has appropriated money for the purpose of helping Pakistan's infrastructure, investing in our education. 48% of our school-going age children don't go to school because we had to invest more in our national defense than we did in our education. Well, we are trying to change that. We are doubling our educational expenditure, trying to get universal education, put more children and girls and everybody into school. And the result would be that we will be a better educated nation. The better educated nation we are, the more productive we'll be. I see many Pakistanis in the audience. Many of them are doing very well here. I don't think anybody of them is on the dole. They all do well. They have the entrepreneurial skills. So all that is needed is an environment, and that enabling environment. So first transformation from alternating between democracy and military rule to consistently pursuing democracy. Second transformation from a culture of emphasis on militancy and militarism to a culture of entrepreneurship. The third transformation is Pakistan is strategically located. We sit at the crossroads of Central Asia, South Asia, China, and the Middle East. Great geographic location, great strategic crossroads. But a strategic crossroads can be viewed as a strategic crossroads of conflicts. We are sitting at the center of conflicts of Central Asia and South Asia and the Middle East. And that is how some of our leaders in the past have thought. They thought Pakistan is at the center of conflict. But you know what? Pakistan is also sitting at the center of opportunities. And the opportunities are India and China are major energy consumers. The Middle East and Central Asia are major suppliers of energy. So what is Pakistan's future? Pakistan will be the energy corridor for that whole region, with energy pipelines coming from Central Asia into South Asia, from Middle Eastern gas pipelines coming through Pakistan into our neighboring countries. And the fourth transformation is from this whole attitude that we have had towards religion, in which some people have arrogated to themselves the right of deciding what is Islam and then insisting that they will define it for everyone else. Pakistan's own tradition is pluralist. Pakistan's founding fathers came from different religious sects. Our first law minister was a Hindu, not even a Muslim. Our first foreign minister belonged to the Ahmadi sect. We had a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who was Catholic. Yes, we are a Muslim country, and yes, we are proud of our Muslim and Islamic heritage, but we will not allow a small minority to define religion in a narrow sense and then impose that by force of arms. And it is a major ideological and philosophical battle. It's a major ideological and philosophical battle, because this minority, however small it might be in percentage terms, is not small in absolute numbers. I just mentioned in passing the population of Pakistan, 180 million. Well, guess what? Those of you who are good at math would know that 1% of 180 million is still 1.8 million, and that's a whole lot of people. And if you say 10%, then you're looking at 18 million people in absolute numbers, bigger than the population of many, many European countries. So even though they are a smaller percentage of our population in absolute numbers, the people with extreme views are a large number of people, and that is something we are working on changing. Two quick points about what the US and Pakistan are doing together in our immediate region. Well, on the one hand, we are building the strategic partnership to try and make these 4 transformations work, in which America will be a partner in helping Pakistan. Pakistan is a partner for the United States in finding stability for Afghanistan and in ensuring that the entire region becomes stable so that America's troops can leave Afghanistan in the hands of a strong Afghan government with a functioning military and a functioning police force, so that the American troops whose lives are in danger in Afghanistan can be freed of the burden of providing for Afghanistan's security. And we are partners in doing that. Now, there is some legacy of the past, and that keeps coming back, and everybody haunts it. That has to do, people say Pakistan's intelligence services and the military have a different view. It's very simple. It's not a different view. We all share concerns about why has Pakistan been concerned about Afghanistan. If you look at the map, you will immediately understand that Pakistan still has unresolved disputes with India. We don't want those disputes to persist. We want India and Pakistan to be partners. We want good relations between India and Pakistan. India will always be our neighbor, and because they will always be our neighbor, we need to have good relations with India. But we have had 4 wars with them in 63 years, and that is not a fact that we can ignore. And so therefore we would like to be able to feel secure vis-a-vis India by maintaining minimum deterrence, by maintaining our military vigilance and strength. But another thing we wouldn't want is for Afghanistan, which is to our northwest, to become a staging ground for any military or intelligence operations inside Pakistan. When I explain this to American politicians, that our concern is very simple. It's like the kind of concern you would have had during the Cold War if the Soviet Union and Mexico had started becoming very close. The US would have been very worried. And that's the concern we have with Afghanistan. It's not about trying to impose our will. We have improved relations with Afghanistan in the last 2.5 years. But change is not easy. And we all know that. And when people are impatient, they start worrying. They're like the kids, I don't know how many of you have taken a road trip with young kids, but, are we there now? Are we there yet? Mom, how long more? And you say, hey, you asked that question 2.5 minutes ago. Kid doesn't understand that. He asked the same question 2.5 minutes later as well. And that's what we are seeing right now. Pakistan and the United States have come a long way in the last 2.5 years. We are proud of the changes we are bringing about and that have been brought about in the US-Pakistan relationship. The Kerry-Lugar-Berman Act that Congress approved, authorizing $1.5 billion with a B, dollars in US assistance every year for 5 years for healthcare, education and infrastructure building in Pakistan, that would enable Pakistanis to feel comfortable that the US is not going to desert Pakistan this time as happened in the past. Pakistan's intelligence service and Pakistan's military working very, very closely together with the United States intelligence and the US military. For those of you who are going to report this in the media, I am proud to say that in the last 2 years, several plots of potential and possible attacks in Europe or the United States that were intercepted by the intelligence services of 15 different countries were foiled with the help of Pakistani intelligence. Pakistan has lost more people to the effort against terrorism in the last few years than any country in the world. In 2009, we lost on average 10 soldiers for each day, injured or killed in the fight against terrorism. We have been able to secure territory away from the Taliban in 6 of the 7 tribal regions. And we will take the battle all the way, because we do not think that the terrorists should be allowed to succeed. People who write and report that Pakistan wants the Taliban to come back to power in Afghanistan have been smoking something they shouldn't be smoking. Because, let's be honest, it is not in Pakistan's interest to have the Taliban with an obscurantist worldview being influential in Afghanistan or any part of Pakistan. We want our children educated. We want our daughters and our granddaughters to be part of the 21st century. And we certainly do not share the obscurantist worldview that these people represent. That said, there are limits to what we can do. There are limits to what our military can accomplish. There are limits to what our intelligence service can accomplish. And there are limits to what our government and our state and our very fledgling and new democracy can accomplish. Now, we have a new democracy. And our political parties, of course, are still trying to figure out how to work with each other. American history is no different. Well, by the way, some would argue the American present is no different either, but I'm not going to go there. But the American history, I mean, if you read this history for the period between 1860 and Woodrow Wilson's election, the only Democrat elected was Grover Cleveland. There were allegations of corruption. There was machine politics. There were city bosses. All of that. And all I say to Americans is, when you want other countries to change and transform, remember, nations evolve over time. Yes, from your experiences, we will benefit and we will do it faster. We will be able to put our city bosses out of politics much quicker than you did. But the fact of the matter is that to assume that somehow a magic wand will be somebody will just wave a magic wand and Pakistan will all of a sudden have all democratic institutions functioning perfectly, all engines firing, everything moving quickly, and even a plane's takeoff takes time. So this is where Pakistan is at right now, and this is where Pakistan-US relations are. We are looking forward to President Obama's visit to Pakistan, which has been promised will take place in 2011. We are also looking forward to President Zardari's visit to the United States, which is also being worked upon. We look forward to strengthening the intelligence and military cooperation, and we look forward to the day when Pakistan's support and cooperation with Afghanistan, the United States and NATO will bring about a strong, stable Afghanistan which will not be used by any non-state actors such as Al-Qaeda or other extremist terrorist groups. And we hope that Pakistan's soil too will not only not be Pakistan is a victim of terrorism, and we want to make sure that Pakistan's soil is not used by any of the extremist groups against our country, our neighbors, or any other country in the world. That is the state of the evolving relations between Pakistan and the United States. And I spoke exactly for 30 minutes. Thank you very much.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a special forum featuring His Excellency Husain Haqqani, Pakistan's ambassador to the United States. We'll return to our speaker in a moment for our traditional City Club questions, a very important part of the City Club's tradition. We encourage you to start formulating your questions now and would respectfully ask that they be brief and to the point. Members and guests alike are welcome to attend City Club forums, and we hope that everyone listening will join the City Club and become active in our ongoing civic dialogue. We are especially gratified today to welcome a number of members and guests here today who are of Pakistani heritage, as acknowledged by our speaker. We are proud to have excellent support from many who have adopted Cleveland as their home, including Fareed Sadiq, who serves on our Forum Foundation Board. Please visit our website. We'd encourage you to do so. That's cityclub.com or .org, cityclub.org, to see a full schedule of our upcoming programs. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. On Wednesday, December 15, the City Club welcomes Aaron Lemieux, founder and president of Tremont Electric. On Friday, December 17, the City Club hosts Ted Gupp, author of A Secret Gift, and an investigative reporter for the Washington Post. If you would like to make reservations or order a CD or DVD of today's program, then please call 1-888-223-6786 or 216-621-0082. We are very pleased to welcome guests today at tables hosted by Buckley King and Margaret Wong and Associates. Thank you all for joining us today. Now we would like to return to our speaker for a traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are City Club Development Assistant Lucille Barbati and City Club Program Director Kerry Miller. First question, please.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for appearing before us today. My question relates to nuclear policy. You are a nuclear nation, and I'd like to have you comment on your policy toward three aspects of nuclear today. One is Iran. The other is recent reports that Myanmar may be developing nuclear or uranium capability. And the third is the non-proliferation treaties.
I think that the question can best be answered by just focusing on the third part. I think that nuclear weapons are a menace. Pakistan believes that. We developed nuclear capability only because our neighbor with whom we had military conflict in the past had nuclear weapons capability, so therefore we had to develop it as a defensive deterrent. And so we support all efforts. And we were part of President Obama's recent initiative, and he had a summit to try and focus on nuclear non-proliferation and on nuclear security. We support all efforts to end nuclear weapons in the world. That said, please understand that the mistake that is made in this country often while discussing non-proliferation is that the attitude is, I am not going to give mine, but you guys give yours up. And that is not going to work. While we do not encourage or want other countries to develop and get nuclear weapons, we understand why this happens. Because you may think that till such time as the United States was the only country that had nuclear weapons, there was a different order in the world. Then a second one came, then a third came. The flaw in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, to which, by the way, Pakistan, India, and Israel are not signatories, is because we have always argued that if there are going to be no nuclear weapons, we will be part of that regime in the world. There should be no nuclear weapons. But if somebody else is going to have nuclear weapons, then it puts us at a tremendous disadvantage in terms of thinking about our security. And that's the only reason why we developed our nuclear weapons. And I think that there is much more understanding of our nuclear posture now than was maybe 20, 15 years ago. As far as other countries are concerned, there needs to be a new global architecture for non-proliferation in which everybody's nuclear weapons are seen as a problem, not just somebody's nuclear weapons.
Hello. Okay. Okay. So you mentioned about Pakistan's partnership with the United States and also trying to improve relations with India. But where is Pakistan as far as relations with China, being that they're your neighbor, as far as in economic relations and trade with China? Can you describe that, please?
Pakistan and China have been very close economic, security, and trading partners for many, many years. And we believe that China and Pakistan have maintained their friendship now for 5 decades without either side letting the other down. So Pakistan remains a very close friend of China. We engage with them in trade, in commerce. They are also our partners in security matters, and we have a very close and friendly political relationship as well.
Thanks for coming. It took a long time for us to get you to come to Cleveland.
Well, you still didn't keep your promise of having me here during baseball season.
I promise to rectify that.
He's a Red Sox fan.
No, he wants to come when the Red Sox are here. He doesn't want to see the Indians. He wants to see the Red Sox beat Cleveland.
Now that's a politician. He knows how to get the home crowd on his side. The Indians will always play better when they are playing the Red Sox. Remember that.
That's true. My question for you is, how does the impact of the floods, the massive floods we have had on the Pakistan economy?
Now, Pakistan had the world's biggest natural disaster in the form of recent floods. I don't know how many people in this audience are aware. 20 million people were affected. 1,893 were killed in the floods. But it's amazing how natural disasters in the world have now become subject to sort of a kind of a death count. So if more people die, then people pay more attention to it. Or if I sometimes say that these days all natural disasters in the world fall into two categories: covered by Anderson Cooper live on CNN and not covered by Anderson Cooper live on CNN. And our floods were in the second category because it's a slow-moving tragedy in the sense that people have had to be evacuated. Land has 24% of Pakistan's, a quarter of Pakistan's farmland came underwater. 1/5 of the country was underwater. And as the water recedes, these 20 million people who are who have been made homeless, their health care, their rehabilitation, etc., is something that needs international assistance. The United States was the first with the most assistance at the governmental level. But I'm sorry to say that America's traditional generosity at the private level has not yet fully manifested itself in case of the Pakistani floods. For example, in case of the Haitian earthquake, the Americans gave roughly $450 per person in terms of the number of people affected in the Haiti earthquake. In case of the Pakistani floods, the giving, including governmental giving globally, comes to $3.2 per person. And you can imagine that this is a massive task. Our GDP growth has been slowed as a result. We will have 2% less growth than we had anticipated, which for a developing country like Pakistan, which is also facing the impact of the global recession and global economic downturn. I shouldn't call it a recession at this point. Global economic downturn, we have had the same consequences as any other country. So right now, we have, through our own means and with the help of our friends, such as the United States, been able to go through the relief phase reasonably well. We saved a lot of lives. The reason why there are fewer casualties is because we evacuated people in time. We were able to bring in enough helicopters from countries like the United Arab Emirates and the United States to evacuate people who were stranded with these massive floods. Just to give you an idea of the biblical proportion of these floods, in Pakistan's northwest province, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, we had the equivalent of 10 years of rainfall in 7 days. And so the reconstruction and rehabilitation with the United Nations thinks will take quite a long time and will require at least an input of $12 billion from the international community, is something where people like yourself and others need to pay attention. And I am now, in fact, one of the reasons why I go out and speak all over the United States is to try and also to raise awareness that this is something where the US government's generosity is much appreciated by Pakistanis, but historically, in case of natural disasters and building back, and by the way, the government of Pakistan has decided that we are going to build back better. For example, what we're going to do is, if a bridge has been washed away, we're not just rebuilding it or putting it together the way it was. We're going to build it better to be able to sustain future natural disasters. So we have a build back better strategy, which we hope will be very effective. And we are working with international partners and also with our own communities to try and address this. But I think in case of natural disasters, people need to rethink that they shouldn't measure natural disasters in numbers of people dead. They should measure them in terms of the number of people affected. And there are 20 million people who have been affected by these floods. We are coming back, but some of the damage has already taken place. In Swat, which we cleared from terrorists just last year, there were 43 bridges spanning different rivers. The oldest of these bridges was built in 1928. The newest was built in 2008. All 43 of them were washed away. So 80 years of building just went away within a few days of the floods. And I think that this is something that people have not yet fully comprehended. We hope that we can raise the awareness, and the American corporate sector has come up with about $25 million in assistance, but there is a lot more room for private charitable contribution through various international organizations and American NGOs and Pakistani NGOs and the government of Pakistan and the government of the United States to help the people who have been affected by these massive floods.
Excellency, thank you for coming to Cleveland. I was wondering if you could tell us how large and active is the Taliban movement in Pakistan, and what is the Pakistani government doing to deter it?
Well, first of all, the Taliban are not a monolithic top-down organization. They're more like a movement with various different dimensions and phases. So there's Afghan Taliban, there's Pakistani Taliban, and then within the Pakistani Taliban movement, they vary from region to region. Some of them are just people with a very local view, and estimates have varied. What we are concerned about is, look, Pakistan as a democracy can very easily absorb religious political movements within the democratic framework. People who say we are going to vote on the basis of our religiosity, we can absorb them. They've been there for a long time, and they have never got more than 5 to 7% of the national vote. If that vote share goes up to 10%, it doesn't threaten the state. They get elected, they get voted. You have religious political movements in this country which work within the framework of the Constitution. It's the terrorists, the Taliban, who use weapons and who fight us and the state, and who terrorize ordinary people, and who blow up girls' schools, and who kill people for not observing religion as they want them to observe it. And their numbers, we have never been able to have an accurate count because it varies at different times, but our strategy is threefold. Number one, to actually regain control of any area where they may have control, then basically clear that area of terrorists, hold it, and then build it for the future with the infrastructure, with the facilities that would enable a next generation to arise without the kind of prejudices and bigotry that has given rise to this particular movement. Pakistan's success so far, especially in the last 2.5 years, is that out of 7 districts in the northwest frontier where the Taliban were particularly active, we have been able to clear 6. That leaves 1, North Waziristan, which you may probably see mentioned in the news quite often, and that is very tricky because of its security situation, and we will at some appropriate moment, given our own constraints and our own capacity, we will deal with the problem there as well. Then there are Taliban-related and linked groups that engage in terrorism in Pakistan cities and in the rest of the country. People who blow up a mosque belonging to a different sect in a big city. People who just walk into a market and shoot people at random to terrorize people. That, as you know, is a very complex intelligence-led operation in which you have to just identify these people and basically keep them out and put them out of business. And that is something that requires a lot of effort and a lot of energy. The good news is that we are making much more progress, and while the number of terrorist incidents have not completely abated, we have been able to catch many significant actors and put them out of business. And the general momentum in Pakistan is against the Taliban. A few years ago, there was apathy about the Taliban. When people were asked, what do you think about the Taliban? People would say, do you think they are evil? Do you think they are good? Well, the people who thought they were evil and had to be fought was much less than it is now. An overwhelming majority of Pakistanis now says they recognize the evil that is represented by Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and all groups linked to that. So that ambiguity that some of our leaders had ended up creating about these people, that ambiguity is gone. Yes, sir.
Ambassador Haqqani, thank you for coming. It would be a great benefit to the United States and to Pakistan and to India if Pakistan and India could find a way to resolve their differences and become friends. They were, after all, at one point part of the same country. They have tremendous amount in common, and what divides them, as I can see from a distance, apart from some difference in religious domination, but really that kind of recedes, I think, is really Kashmir, at least from our perspective. And some of the cleverest people I've ever met have come from Pakistan and India, and it baffles me that we have so little on the table in the way of a win-win solution. From both sides, we seem to hear more about win-lose solutions. And I ask you if you think there is some prospect that for Kashmir, perhaps leaving it under the current titular involvement with India, but achieving all the kinds of cultural and economic relationship that you want with that part of the world, is there some way we can get to a win-win solution so these two great countries, these very powerful, consequential countries, can become friends? The United States can be spared the burden of trying to choose.
Well, first of all, let me just say that we don't want the United States to choose. We are very comfortable with the concept of the United States being friends with both India and Pakistan. And we look forward to American support in Pakistan and India overcoming their differences and developing a relationship for the 21st century that is very different from the past. At the risk of sounding frivolous, I would just say that the India-Pakistan relationship has all the dynamics of a couple that lived very happily together in a marriage for many years and then unhappily for some time and then ended up getting a divorce. So think of the worst. Just shut your eyes for like 4 seconds and think of the worst divorced couple you know and give them both nuclear weapons. The side that wanted the divorce won't forgive the other for not making it easier. And the side that didn't want the divorce just goes on and on and on about, but why did you actually ask for the divorce? You should have stayed. You know, wasn't the house comfortable enough? Wasn't I earning enough? Weren't we good together? So it takes time. That's what the dynamic is here. Resolving Jammu and Kashmir will definitely help India and Pakistan move forward with a new dynamic and a friendly relationship. And I think that Pakistan is ready to engage with India in a composite dialogue which will address all outstanding issues between our countries, including Jammu and Kashmir. The real issue here is trust. The legacy of the past has made us both starting to mistrust each other. And there are different degrees within Pakistan and within India of people who trust each other or are willing to trust each other. It will take some time, but let me just say categorically that I envision, and I don't know if you noticed in my speech, I did give a lot of time to the vision for the future of Pakistan, because all you hear is, and Pakistanis themselves, and the audience here should take note, especially the Pakistanis. Pakistanis themselves are partly to blame. Pakistanis have ended up becoming a community of doctors and engineers, etc., and not enough social scientists, so that there's not enough laying out of the social vision for the rest of the world to worry about, and everybody just worries about all the problems of the past and everything. Look, India and Pakistan have to find a solution, because that is the march of history. We are neighbors. We both have nuclear weapons. We cannot use those nuclear weapons to destroy each other, because that's not the solution. Even that metaphorical divorced couple is not going to use nuclear weapons against each other. They're not going to destroy each other's families and their children. They will have to find a way out. So we will have to do it. And Pakistan, for its part, is willing to do it. It's only a question of getting from point A to point B and the time that it might take. And again, I understand this is the 5th time I'm using the word patience in my presentation this evening. Hopefully it will be the last. With a little patience, we will get there. We understand that there are people in India who are not very receptive to the idea of talking to Pakistan with an open heart. But there are others who are. And there are people in Pakistan who want to leave the past behind and build a new future. And very frankly, it will be good for both countries. It will be good for our people. 1/3 of Pakistanis live below the poverty line. 26% of Indians live below the poverty line. And the poverty line in South Asia is a family living on less than $1 a day. So very frankly, while India's economy is growing and it's expanding and we see India emerging in many, many ways, it will be in India's interest as well not to have problems with its very significant neighbor. And most important, it's like, you can't have 1.5 billion people sort of, in need of collective therapy that they can't get over their partition. We can move on. Pakistan is a reality. It's there to stay. And India is a reality, and it's there to stay. And it's only a question of figuring out how we can be neighbors instead of just people who can't get over their historic grievances about each other.
Mr. Ambassador Haqqani, I'm so sorry to hear of the troubles that the floods bring, along with all of the other troubles that Pakistanis face. And I wonder if you would have a few moments to devote to the relations between Pakistan and Iran and Pakistan and Iraq. Thank you.
Well, Pakistan, of course, has Iran is Pakistan's neighbor. And as a neighbor, again, the same things that I said about India apply to Iran and Afghanistan and China. We understand that just as you in the United States understand the value of your good relations with Canada and your good relations with Mexico, and even the neighbors that are a little further down, apart from the fact that, the weather in the Caribbean is good and some of you want to go there for your vacation, you need to have good relations with them because they're your neighbors. So we understand the need for having that. Of course, we understand the concerns of our friends in the United States about developments inside and relating to Iran. And we always make an effort to try and help overcome those concerns. But for our own part and for our own security, we maintain a relationship with Iran of mutual respect and recognition for each other's sovereignty. In case of Iraq, Pakistan is a predominantly Muslim country, and we have always tried to build positive relations with all Muslim countries, including Iraq. And we really look upon the emergence of a democratic order in Iraq as a very, very positive development, not only for Iraq, but for the entire greater Middle East region. I'm done.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to His Excellency Husain Haqqani, Pakistan's ambassador to the United States. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.